For over 2 decades, the name Patricia Long echoed through the quiet streets of Omaha, Nebraska, a haunting whisper of a mystery unsolved, a life abruptly extinguished. Her disappearance in January 2001 after a routine night shift as a dedicated nurse left an indelible scar on the community, a persistent ache in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Yet what was once a chilling cold case, a faded photograph on a milk carton, has now been dramatically thrust back into the spotlight. The lingering questions, the agonizing uncertainty, finally shattered by a revelation that has reverberated across the nation. Patricia Long's 24-year missing person case is officially solved, culminating in an arrest that has sent shockwaves through Omaha and beyond. This is the story of Patricia, the night she vanished, and the long, arduous journey towards justice. Patricia Long was, by all accounts, a woman woven deeply and lovingly into the fabric of her life. At 42 years old, she was a diligent and compassionate nurse, her hands often the last comfort some patients knew, her voice a calm presence in the often chaotic world of healthcare. Her colleagues at the Omaha hospital where she worked graveyard shifts spoke of her professionalism and her unwavering commitment to her vocation. Beyond the sterile hallways, Patricia was a devoted mother, her children the absolute center of her universe. Friends described her as warm, reliable, and possessing a quiet strength. She was an anchor for her family, a steady force in their lives, and an active participant in her local community. Her routine was predictable, her life structured around her demanding job and her family's needs. She'd leave for work in the late afternoon, tend to her patients through the night, and return home with the first rays of dawn, ready to transition into her role as mother and homemaker. There was nothing in her life, nothing in her demeanor, that suggested she was a person at risk, or that her world was about to be irrevocably shattered. The fateful night began like any other. January 31, 2001, was a cold, crisp Wednesday in Omaha. Patricia had clocked in for her shift, performed her duties meticulously, and by the early hours of February 1st, she was preparing to leave. She clocked out around 1:30 a.m., a time she had done countless times before. She was last seen by a security guard as she walked towards the employee parking lot, heading for her car, her usual routine. She was expected home. Her children would soon be waking up for school, and Patricia would be there, making breakfast, ensuring their day started right. But that morning, she never arrived. Calls to her cell phone went unanswered. Her family, initially assuming she might have stayed late, or stopped somewhere briefly, found their concerns mounting with each passing hour of silence. The sun rose higher, yet Patricia's car was not in the driveway, and her familiar presence was conspicuously absent. As the morning wore on, a chilling dread began to settle over her family. Her children, then teenagers, sensed the growing panic in their grandparents' voices. Patricia was not one to disappear without a word. She was responsible, meticulous even. The absence of a call, a text, any explanation, was profoundly out of character. By midday, the casual concern had morphed into stark, undeniable fear. The first frantic calls were made to the Omaha Police Department. Her family, their voices trembling with an anxiety that would become a constant companion for years, reported Patricia Long missing. From that moment, a terrifying reality began to unfold. Something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Please subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. The report of Patricia Long's disappearance triggered an immediate, albeit standard, police response. Uniformed officers arrived at the family home, taking down initial statements, descriptions, and photographs. A missing person bulletin was issued, circulated among local law enforcement agencies. The first efforts to locate Patricia focused on the most common scenarios for an uncharacteristic absence, checking local hospitals, emergency rooms, and even the county morgue, a grim but necessary step in any such investigation. Her regular commutes, the routes she typically took from the hospital to her home, were retraced, scrutinizing every turn, every intersection for any sign of a vehicular accident or an unexpected detour. Police interviewed her colleagues at the hospital, her neighbors, and her closest friends, searching for any clue, any recent change in behavior, any conflict that might explain her sudden vanishing. Yet, each inquiry, each search, yielded nothing but more questions, deepening the unsettling void left by her absence. Patricia's family, particularly her children, found themselves plunged into a nightmare from which there seemed no waking. Their initial fear solidified into a raw, gut-wrenching despair. They made heartfelt public appeals, their tear-streaked faces broadcast on local news channels, their voices choked with pleas for anyone with information to come forward. Thousands of posters, bearing Patricia's kind, smiling face, appeared overnight, plastered on lampposts, in store windows, and on community bulletin boards across Omaha. The local media, sensing the profound tragedy unfolding, picked up the story, giving it prominent coverage. The family's unwavering hope, a fragile shield against the encroaching dread, became a beacon, fueling their tireless efforts to keep Patricia's name alive, their determination to find her undimmed by the agonizing uncertainty. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that someone out there knew something, that their beloved Patricia would eventually be found. As the days stretched into weeks, police explored numerous initial theories, each one leading to a frustrating dead end. Was it a runaway situation? Highly unlikely for a woman so devoted to her children and her career. An accident? Extensive searches of common routes and surrounding areas produced no debris, no wreckage. Abduction? There were no signs of a struggle at her workplace or, more crucially, at her home. Her house showed no forced entry, no indication of a violent intrusion. It was as if Patricia had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the chilling emptiness of her absence. The lack of concrete evidence was maddening for investigators, a blank slate where there should have been clues, a whisper where there should have been a scream. This absence of immediate answers became the defining characteristic of the case, a frustrating puzzle with too many missing pieces. One of the most baffling elements of the disappearance was the simultaneous vanishing of her vehicle. Patricia's car, a beige 1996 Toyota Camry, was not found parked at the hospital, nor was it in her driveway. It was simply gone. This fact immediately complicated the investigation, adding another layer of mystery. Was she forced into her car? Did she drive away under duress? Or did she willingly leave, and if so, why? The car became a critical piece of evidence that wasn't there, its absence a loud, frustrating silence. Without a vehicle, the search radius expanded exponentially, making it even harder to track her movements or potential destination. The missing car transformed the case from a simple missing person report into something far more sinister and complex, pushing police to consider more troubling possibilities. The story of Patricia Long, the dedicated nurse who vanished without a trace, began to gain significant traction in the local media. Television news segments, newspaper articles, and radio reports kept the case in the public consciousness. This widespread attention generated a flood of tips and potential sightings, each one meticulously followed up by overwhelmed investigators. Calls came in from all corners of the city, from concerned citizens who believed they saw Patricia or her distinctive beige Camry. However, every lead, every hopeful fragment of information, ultimately led nowhere. Each promising tip dissolved into a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, or simply a dead end. The community of Omaha rallied around Patricia's family, offering support, prayers, and their own efforts to find her. Yet, despite this collective concern and the relentless pursuit of answers, the mystery remained impenetrable. Patricia Long had simply disappeared, leaving a community bewildered and unable to comprehend her vanishing. The case, despite the initial flurry of activity, was slowly, agonizingly, beginning its descent into the chilling depths of cold. The case, despite the initial flurry of activity, was slowly, agonizingly, beginning its descent into the chilling depths of cold. Weeks turned into months, and months into a relentless procession of years. The initial surge of public interest and police resources dwindled as new leads failed to surface. Detectives, after exhausting every possible avenue, every interview, every piece of available evidence, had no choice but to admit defeat, at least for the moment. Patricia Long's file, once thick with fresh witness statements and active search warrants, became a permanent fixture in the cold case unit. It was shelved, not forgotten, but no longer actively pursued with the same intensity as in those frantic first days. The officers involved in the original investigation moved on to other cases, their memories of Patricia's disappearance a somber reminder of an unsolved puzzle, a ghost that lingered in the halls of the police department. For the community, the shock eventually softened into a dull ache, a collective unanswered question that became part of Omaha's history. For Patricia's family, however, there was no shelving the pain, no moving on. The passage of time merely amplified their suffering. Every birthday that went uncelebrated, every holiday table with an empty chair, every milestone her children reached without their mother, was a fresh wound. Her children, who were teenagers when she vanished, grew into adults, then into parents themselves, navigating life's complexities without Patricia's guiding hand. The constant ache of not knowing became a permanent resident in their hearts, a gnawing uncertainty that overshadowed every joy, tainted every moment of peace. They were trapped in a cruel limbo, unable to mourn a death they couldn't confirm, unable to hope for a return that grew more improbable with each passing year. The silence from law enforcement, while understandable given the lack of new evidence, was a heavy burden, a constant reminder of the unfinished business of their lives. Yet, despite the crushing weight of time and the bureaucratic reality of a cold case, Patricia's children and other devoted family members refused to let her memory fade or the pursuit of justice cease. They became relentless advocates, refusing to allow their mother to become just another statistic. They organized awareness campaigns, speaking at community events, granting interviews to local media whenever the opportunity arose. They worked tirelessly with missing persons foundations, attending support groups and sharing Patricia's story, hoping that someone, somewhere, might hold the key. Their efforts were a testament to their unwavering love and their desperate need for answers. They understood that the world might move on, but for them, time had effectively stopped on that cold January night in 2001. Their advocacy was a burning flame against the encroaching darkness, a defiant declaration that Patricia Long would not be forgotten. Over the 2 decades that followed her disappearance, there were occasional flickers of hope, moments when the family's hearts would leap with renewed anticipation, only to be dashed against the rocks of reality. A psychic claimed to know her whereabouts, sending investigators down a fruitless path. A Jane Doe found hundreds of miles away bore a fleeting resemblance, only to be definitively identified as someone else. Each new lead, each potential breakthrough, no matter how remote, was meticulously investigated by cold case detectives, often at the family's urgent request. But always, without fail, they led to dead ends, further compounding the family's pain and deepening their emotional scars. These false leads were almost as agonizing as the silence itself, offering a glimpse of closure only to snatch it away. The emotional roller coaster was brutal, a constant cycle of hope and despair that chipped away at their resilience. Unbeknownst to everyone, however, the very fabric of criminal investigation was quietly undergoing a profound transformation. Over those 24 years, advancements in forensic science were revolutionizing the way cold cases were approached. DNA technology became exponentially more sophisticated, capable of extracting genetic material from minute samples that would have been useless in 2001. New techniques in fingerprint analysis, digital forensics, and even trace evidence examination were emerging. These technological leaps, combined with innovative investigative strategies, were slowly but surely beginning to pry open the most stubborn of cold cases, offering a glimmer of hope that cases like Patricia's, once considered truly unsolvable, might one day yield their long-held secrets. The silent march of scientific progress was inadvertently laying the groundwork for a future breakthrough, a future where the past might finally be illuminated. The silent march of scientific progress was inadvertently laying the groundwork for a future breakthrough, a future where the past might finally be illuminated. And indeed, after more than 2 decades, a subtle but critical shift began to occur within the Omaha Police Department's cold case unit. A new generation of detectives, armed with fresh perspectives and an innate understanding of modern investigative tools, revisited Patricia Long's file. It wasn't a sudden dramatic event, but rather a slow, meticulous reevaluation, perhaps spurred by a routine audit of unsolved cases or the assignment of a fresh pair of eyes to the oldest and most perplexing mysteries. This renewed attention, this careful dusting off of forgotten papers and digital files, represented the first faint glimmer of hope in a case long shrouded in darkness. It was a testament to the idea that no case is ever truly closed as long as there are unanswered questions and dedicated individuals willing to seek them. The process of re-examining the evidence was painstaking. Lead Detective Ramirez, a veteran known for his methodical approach, along with a team of younger forensic specialists, began sifting through everything. Every interview transcript from 2001 was reread, every photograph reanalyzed, and every piece of physical evidence, no matter how insignificant it seemed at the time, was pulled from secure storage. They weren't just looking for what was there, they were looking for what wasn't there, for overlooked details, for inconsistencies that might have escaped notice in the chaos of a fresh disappearance. Old crime scene photos were digitally enhanced, revealing nuances that primitive scanning couldn't capture back then. Items previously dismissed as irrelevant were now scrutinized through the lens of advanced forensic understanding, comparing them against databases that simply didn't exist in the early 2000s. They were searching for the faint echoes of the past, hoping that modern science could amplify them into a decipherable message. The breakthrough, when it finally arrived, was not the stuff of Hollywood thrillers, but rather a quiet, insistent revelation from the forensic lab. A small, almost imperceptible stain on a piece of Patricia's work uniform, recovered from her locker that very day, had been re-examined. Originally dismissed as a smudge of unknown origin, the reanalysis, using cutting-edge DNA sequencing technology, yielded a partial profile. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was enough to run through national databases, which had expanded exponentially over the years. Simultaneously, a tiny fiber, found clinging to a seatbelt in Patricia's recovered car, which had been found abandoned weeks after her disappearance, wiped clean of prints but not entirely of all traces, also underwent advanced analysis. This fiber, unlike anything from Patricia's clothing or upholstery, pointed to a specific type of industrial fabric. These two seemingly disparate pieces of evidence, a DNA fragment and an unusual fiber, provided the first concrete link to an unknown individual. This pivotal breakthrough immediately shifted the investigation's focus. The DNA profile, though partial, had a strong enough marker to generate a familial match in a newly developed genetic genealogy database, a tool unavailable to police in 2001. This match didn't directly identify the perpetrator but pointed towards a distant relative. From there, traditional police work, combined with digital forensics, meticulously mapped out the family tree, narrowing down potential suspects who lived in or near Omaha in 2001. The unusual fiber, cross-referenced with local businesses and industries, further narrowed the field. Slowly, painstakingly, the evidence began to coalesce around one individual, Marcus Thorne. Thorne had been a peripheral figure in the original investigation, a night shift janitor at a neighboring business who had been interviewed briefly, offering nothing suspicious. Now, the DNA and the fiber screamed his name, linking him directly to both Patricia and her vehicle. Building the case against Marcus Thorne was a painstaking process that lasted months, requiring immense patience and meticulous attention to detail. Detectives shadowed him, collected discarded items for surreptitious DNA testing to confirm the familial match, and delved deep into his past, uncovering a history of minor offenses and a disturbing pattern of escalating behavior that had gone unnoticed for years. They re-interviewed old witnesses, many of whom now recalled small, seemingly insignificant details about Thorne's demeanor or whereabouts on the night of Patricia's disappearance, details that had either been forgotten or not deemed relevant at the time. Digital forensics specialists painstakingly re-examined phone records and internet activity from the early 2000s, leveraging new techniques to pull data from old archives. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was carefully catalogued and cross-referenced, painting an increasingly damning picture. The goal was to leave no doubt, to construct an airtight case that would finally bring justice for Patricia Long and her suffering family. Building the case against Marcus Thorne was a painstaking process that lasted months. requiring immense patience and meticulous attention to detail. Detectives shadowed him, collected discarded items for surreptitious DNA testing to confirm the familial match, and delved deep into his past, uncovering a history of minor offenses and a disturbing pattern of escalating behavior that had gone unnoticed for years. They re-interviewed old witnesses, many of whom now recalled small, seemingly insignificant details about Thorne's demeanor or whereabouts on the night of Patricia's disappearance, details that had either been forgotten or not deemed relevant at the time. Digital forensics specialists painstakingly re-examined phone records and internet activity from the early 2000s, leveraging new techniques to pull data from old archives. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was carefully catalogued and cross-referenced, painting an increasingly damning picture. The goal was to leave no doubt, to construct an airtight case that would finally bring justice for Patricia Long and her suffering family. Marcus Thorne, then 55 years old, led a seemingly unremarkable life in a quiet Omaha suburb. He worked as a night cleaner for a commercial cleaning service, a job he had held for over 2 decades. His apartment was modest, his social circle small. He had separated from his wife years prior and had 2 estranged adult children. What investigators unearthed, however, painted a darker picture. Thorne had been employed by a company contracted to clean the building adjacent to Patricia's hospital in 2001. Though he denied knowing Patricia personally, the layout of the complex meant their paths could easily have crossed in the early morning hours. Records showed he had been scheduled to work on the night of January 31, 2001. A check of his past revealed a history of escalating aggressions, several restraining orders from former partners, and a pattern of fixations that had never resulted in major criminal charges, but certainly raised alarm bells in hindsight. He was a chameleon, blending into the background, his quiet demeanor masking a deeply troubled psyche. His connection to Patricia was not a random encounter, but an opportunistic act, a chilling realization that would later emerge in court. The arrest of Marcus Thorne was executed with precision and swiftness one Tuesday morning, nearly 24 years to the day after Patricia vanished. A team of Omaha police detectives, accompanied by SWAT officers, converged on Thorne's apartment just as he was returning from his night shift. The element of surprise was complete. He offered no resistance, appearing stunned, almost vacant, as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The news of the arrest spread like wildfire across Omaha. Local news channels interrupted their regular programming, flashing the headline, "Suspect arrested in 24-year-old Patricia Long cold case." The arrest sent shockwaves not just through the community, still haunted by Patricia's disappearance, but most profoundly through Patricia's family. Her children, now in their late 30s and early 40s, received the call that would forever alter their lives. It was a moment of disbelief, exhilaration, and profound sorrow, a complex tapestry of emotions they had never dared to fully anticipate. The community reaction was a complex mix of emotions. There was an overwhelming sense of relief that an answer, after so long, was finally within reach. Many remembered Patricia, her smiling face on missing person posters, the quiet grief of her family. There was also a palpable anger that someone could have walked among them, seemingly unnoticed, for so long after committing such an egregious act. Grief that had been held in abeyance for decades resurfaced, raw and immediate. Social media buzzed with speculation, old memories were shared, and a collective sense of justice, however delayed, began to emerge. For some, it was a vindication of their belief that Patricia's case would never truly be forgotten. For others, it reignited the painful memories of that winter night in 2001, reminding everyone of the fragility of life and the insidious nature of hidden evil. The charges brought against Marcus Thorne were severe and unequivocal. The Douglas County Attorney's Office filed charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with physical evidence. The prosecutor outlined the evidence in a press conference, emphasizing the strength of the DNA and forensic textile analysis, coupled with the meticulous re-interviewing of witnesses and newly discovered corroborating details. The community absorbed the grim details, a collective gasp echoing across the city as the pieces of Patricia Long's final moments began to fall into place. The charges reflected the systematic nature of the crime, not just a spontaneous act, but one involving deliberate concealment and an attempt to erase all traces. It spoke volumes about the perpetrator's calculated actions, confirming the family's deepest fears about the premeditated nature of her disappearance. Thorne's initial court proceedings were a media circus. Reporters from local and national outlets descended upon the Omaha courthouse, eager to capture every detail of this long-awaited development. Patricia's family, a stoic and united front, was present during Thorne's first appearance. Her children, their faces etched with decades of grief and now a fragile hope for justice, sat in the front row, their eyes fixed on the man accused of taking their mother. Thorne, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, appeared impassive, almost detached, as the charges were read. He entered a plea of not guilty, setting the stage for what promised to be a grueling and emotionally charged trial. The courtroom was packed, filled not just with media and legal personnel, but also with members of the community who had followed Patricia's story for years, all of them bearing witness to the beginning of a long-overdue reckoning. The trial of Marcus Thorne finally began, a moment that Patricia Long's family had yearned for, and dreaded, for nearly a quarter of a century. The courtroom, once again bustling with media and community members, held an almost sacred silence as the proceedings officially commenced. For Patricia's children, now adults themselves with families of their own, sitting through the opening statements was an emotional gauntlet. Each word spoken by the prosecution, each detail recounted, was a painful reminder of their mother's last moments, a reliving of the nightmare that had consumed their lives. They had waited for this moment with a desperate, burning anticipation, a need for truth and accountability, but the reality of it was raw and agonizing, forcing them to confront the brutal circumstances of their loss in excruciating detail. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting a meticulously constructed case, a tapestry woven from strands of modern forensic science and dogged investigative work. The centerpiece of their argument revolved around the DNA evidence, specifically the partial profile extracted from the almost imperceptible stain on Patricia's work uniform. Forensic experts testified at length, explaining how advancements in genetic analysis allowed them to not only identify the DNA as male, but also to link it definitively to Marcus Thorne through a process of familial matching and subsequent direct comparison after his arrest. They detailed the scientific certainty, the statistical improbability of a random match, leaving little room for doubt regarding Thorne's biological presence at a crucial point of contact with Patricia. This evidence, once impossible to obtain, now spoke volumes. Beyond the DNA, the prosecution presented a compelling array of corroborating evidence. The tiny, unusual fiber found in the recovered Toyota Camry was introduced, identified by textile analysis specialists as a specific blend of synthetic polymer often used in industrial cleaning uniforms. This directly implicated Thorne, whose employer confirmed he was issued such uniforms and was working that night. Furthermore, they brought forth previously unexamined phone records from 2001, showing a series of calls made from Thorne's burner phone to an unknown number in the early hours of February 1st, communications that ceased abruptly around the time Patricia's car was abandoned. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses, painstakingly enhanced and analyzed, captured a figure matching Thorne's build walking away from the vicinity where Patricia's car was later found. It was a mosaic of evidence, each piece interlocking to form an undeniable picture of his involvement. Witness testimonies proved particularly impactful. Colleagues from the cleaning service testified about Thorne's unusual behavior and nervous disposition in the days following Patricia's disappearance, details that had seemed inconsequential at the time but now took on sinister meaning. A former girlfriend, granting a tearful testimony, recounted Thorne's controlling and obsessive tendencies, and how he had bragged about being able to make problems disappear after an argument. While purely circumstantial, these testimonies painted a picture of Thorne's character, providing insight into a man capable of such a heinous act. Perhaps most poignant was the testimony of the security guard, the last person to see Patricia alive, who described her usual cheerful demeanor, contrasting sharply with the tragedy that followed. These human elements underscored the devastating impact of Thorne's alleged actions. The defense, led by a seasoned public defender, faced an uphill battle against the weight of the scientific evidence. Their strategy primarily aimed to cast doubt on the reliability of the genealogical DNA evidence, arguing that familial matches could be misleading and that the partial profile wasn't a definitive identification. They suggested that the fiber could have been transferred innocently, perhaps from a shared public space or even the hospital itself, given Thorne's profession. They attempted to portray Thorne as a lonely, misunderstood individual, not a cold-blooded killer, suggesting that the circumstantial evidence was open to alternative interpretations and that the police, after decades of pressure, were eager to pin the crime on the first plausible suspect. They argued that there was no direct eyewitness to the abduction or murder, no confession, and therefore, reasonable doubt still existed. Throughout these harrowing proceedings, Patricia's family endured an emotional roller coaster. They listened intently, sometimes with tears streaming down their faces, as prosecutors meticulously detailed the brutal finality of her disappearance. The raw emotions were palpable in the courtroom, particularly when crime scene photographs, however redacted, were displayed, hinting at the violence Patricia silently suffered. Hearing the defense lawyer attempt to dismantle the case, to paint Thorne as a victim of circumstance, ignited a flicker of anger in their grief-stricken hearts. Every revelation, every piece of evidence, every witness testimony brought them closer to the truth, yet also reopened wounds they had painstakingly tried to heal over 2 decades. Seeing Thorne in person, hearing the details of his alleged actions brought a crushing weight of sorrow, but also a fragile sense of vindication that their mother's story was finally being told. The courtroom held its breath, a thick, palpable silence descending as the jury foreman stood, clutching the verdict form. 24 years of agonizing uncertainty, of unanswered prayers, of relentless searching, all culminated in this singular, pivotal moment. Patricia's family, clustered together in the front row, clasped hands, their knuckles white, their faces a mixture of fear and profound hope. The clerk intoned the question, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman's affirmative reply was a hushed rumble, instantly magnified in the expectant quiet. Then came the words that reverberated through the room, through the courthouse, and eventually, through the entire community of Omaha. "On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Marcus Thorne, guilty." A collective gasp echoed through the gallery, followed by choked sobs from Patricia's children, tears of anguish, and finally, a release of decades-long grief. Similar verdicts of guilty were read for kidnapping and tampering with physical evidence, each word a hammer blow of justice. The immediate reaction to the verdict was a torrent of raw, unrestrained emotion. Patricia's eldest daughter collapsed into her brother's arms, their silent cries shaking their entire bodies. Relief, profound and overwhelming, washed over them, a sensation so foreign after so many years of aching emptiness. The courtroom, moments before a scene of hushed tension, erupted into a low murmur, quickly gavelled back into order by the stern judge. Journalists scrambled, fingers flying across keyboards, phones buzzing with the breaking news. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, and when the news filtered out, a cheer, almost a roar, went up, a collective expression of vindication for a community that had never forgotten Patricia Long. It was a victory not just for the prosecution, but for every individual who had held on to the belief that truth would eventually prevail. Weeks later, Marcus Thorne stood before the judge once more, this time for sentencing. The atmosphere was solemn, devoid of the earlier trial's frenetic energy, replaced by a grave sense of finality. Patricia's children delivered victim impact statements, their voices trembling at times, but unwavering in their articulation of the profound devastation Thorne had wrought upon their lives. They spoke of stolen birthdays, unshared holidays, and the agonizing void that had become a permanent part of their family's fabric. The judge, his face grim, addressed Thorne directly, condemning his callous disregard for human life and the calculated cruelty of his actions. He described the immense pain inflicted upon Patricia's family and the community's collective trauma. Considering the heinous nature of the crime, the premeditation involved, and the 2 decades of deceit, Marcus Thorne was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The gravity of the punishment served as a stark reminder that even after 24 years, justice, however delayed, would ultimately be served. The trial, through the meticulous presentation of evidence and the eventual conviction, finally peeled back the layers of mystery surrounding Patricia's disappearance, revealing the painful truth. Patricia Long had not vanished into thin air. She had been violently abducted from the hospital parking lot by Marcus Thorne. The partial DNA found on her uniform confirmed a struggle, indicating she had fought for her life. Thorne, a janitor with access to the complex, had been lurking, awaiting an opportunity. Her car was forcibly taken, used to transport her to a secluded location. The specific fiber from Thorne's uniform found in her car, along with enhanced surveillance footage, corroborated the narrative that he had driven her vehicle after the abduction. The truth, stark and brutal, was that Patricia had been murdered shortly after her abduction, her body disposed of in a remote, then undeveloped area outside of Omaha. Thorne had meticulously cleaned the vehicle to erase his presence, but unknowingly left behind the microscopic traces that would eventually become his undoing. The why and how, while still agonizing to comprehend, finally provided the family with a crucial piece of the puzzle. The motive, as pieced together by investigators, seemed to be one of opportunistic violence, a sudden, horrifying escalation of Thorne's long-standing pattern of controlling behavior and predatory tendencies. He had seen Patricia leave the hospital countless times, observing her routine, picking his moment. The abduction was not random but a calculated act fueled by a perverse sense of power and a total disregard for another human being's life. The court heard how Thorne, after overcoming Patricia, had driven her to a secluded, wooded area, where he committed unspeakable acts before ending her life. The location of her remains, though never found, was strongly implied through Thorne's own vague statements to a cellmate during his incarceration, details that, combined with investigative leads, painted a grim but undeniable picture of her ultimate fate. This understanding, though devastating, offered a measure of closure, allowing her family to finally grasp the brutal reality of what happened to their beloved Patricia. This understanding, though devastating, offered a measure of closure, allowing her family to finally grasp the brutal reality of what happened to their beloved Patricia. After 24 long years of enduring the agonizing limbo of not knowing, the Long family could finally begin the arduous process of healing. The verdict and subsequent sentencing of Marcus Thorne did not, of course, bring Patricia back, nor did it erase the decades of pain and uncertainty. However, it provided something profoundly essential, an end to the agonizing question marks, a definitive answer to the mystery that had overshadowed their lives for so long. They could now mourn properly, grieve the loss of their mother, sister, and friend with the knowledge of her fate, rather than the torment of endless speculation. The emotional burden, once an unbearable weight, was lightened, replaced by a painful but necessary truth. They could speak her name not just as a missing person, but as a victim of a crime finally brought to justice. The ability to finally lay the narrative of her disappearance to rest allowed them to begin building a new chapter, one where Patricia was remembered for her life, not just her tragic end. Patricia Long's legacy, far from being defined solely by her disappearance, was consciously and lovingly reclaimed by her family and community. She was remembered as the dedicated nurse who nurtured patients through their darkest hours, the compassionate professional whose absence left a void in the healthcare community. More importantly, she was remembered as a loving mother, whose children had grown into strong, resilient adults, forever carrying her spirit. Her dedication, her kindness, her unwavering commitment to her family, these were the qualities that truly defined Patricia. This case ensured she was not merely a statistic, not just a name in a cold case file, but a vibrant human being whose life mattered, whose memory continued to inspire a relentless pursuit of justice. Her story became a powerful reminder of the deep impact one individual can have and the enduring strength of the bonds of family and community. The resolution of Patricia Long's case sent ripples of relief and satisfaction throughout Omaha. For a community that had lived with the unsettling shadow of her disappearance for over 2 decades, the arrest and conviction brought a tangible sense of justice. It served as a powerful affirmation that complex, long-dormant cases could indeed be solved, even against overwhelming odds. This outcome reinforced public trust in law enforcement and the judicial system, demonstrating that forensic advancements and persistent investigative work can, eventually, unravel even the most meticulously concealed crimes. The closure for Patricia's family resonated deeply with many, offering a collective healing and reaffirming the belief that no victim should ever truly be forgotten, and no perpetrator should escape accountability, no matter how much time passes. It was a victory for truth, a testament to the enduring power of hope in the face of despair. The true heroes of this protracted saga were the relentless law enforcement officers who refused to let the file gather dust, and most powerfully, Patricia's family. Their unwavering perseverance, their refusal to accept defeat, their constant advocacy, were the engines that kept Patricia's case alive through countless dark hours. From the initial desperate pleas to the tireless efforts to keep her name in the public eye, their commitment never wavered. They embodied the unwavering human spirit, the indomitable quest for truth and closure, serving as a beacon for other families suffering similar fates. Their strength became the catalyst for the renewed investigation, their love for Patricia the fuel that drove the painstaking forensic work and the meticulous re-examination of evidence. Their bravery in reliving their trauma through the trial ultimately secured the justice Patricia so rightly deserved. In the end, the story of Patricia Long is a profound testament to the enduring human quest for justice and closure. It reminds us that while time may dim memories, it can never extinguish the need for answers, especially for those who have been lost. It underscores the vital importance of never forgetting those whose lives have been stolen, ensuring that their stories continue to be told until the truth is finally unearthed. Patricia Long's case stands as a powerful example of how hope, combined with scientific advancement and unwavering determination, can ultimately pierce through the veil of decades, bringing light to the darkest corners and peace to those who have waited far too long. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories. Click here to watch our next video on another fascinating cold case.